Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this video, and welcome back to a new episode of At the Time of This Recording. And today we are going to be discussing, rating, and reviewing the discography of the Las Vegas band, The Killers. I've been a fan of The Killers since I first heard them, which was actually from Top of the Pops, and when they played the video to Smile Like You Mean It. At that time, it was unlike anything else that was in the charts at that time. Very distinctively 80s synth-led compositions, influenced by the likes of Depeche Mode and New Order, but with a more sort of anthemic edge, mostly thanks to the U2 inspired guitar passages. Fun fact, the influence from New Order goes actually deeper than you might think, as the band took their name from the fictional band, The Killers, which was featured in the music video for the New Order single Crystal. The band has essentially stayed the same since its inception, with the charismatic and distinctive frontman, as well as primary songwriter Brandon Flowers, Dave Kooning on guitars, Mark Sturmer on bass, and Ronnie Vannucci on the drums. Dave and Mark had at times took hiatuses from the band, but they never went as far as actually leaving the band. They have released 7 albums, and the band have dived into a wide range of genres from new wave to Americana and more or less everything else in between. So there's plenty to get stuck into. So what are we waiting for? Let's do this. In last place, I have placed Imploding the Mirage. This was the band's 6th album, released in 2020. The Killers have not released any bad albums by any means, but the main problem I have with this particular one is that the hooks and memorable lyrics are essentially entirely absent. For the first time in their career, it sounded like the band are a little bit devoid of ideas, which as a result makes the songs quite forgettable overall. There are times in which I see glimmers of what I think they're trying to do. Songs such as My Own Soul's Warning, Dying Breed, and Caution seem to focus more on dynamics, so quieter and building up to louder passages. And they really roll with this formula throughout the album, which results in quite a lot of predictable songs, but also some that feel like cast-offs from their previous albums, such as Fire and Bone and Where the Dreams Run Dry. The loud passages, however, are pretty loud, so proceed with caution with the volume before you press play. There are redeemable elements to this album which I actually really do need to talk about. It's not all bad news. My Own Soul's Warning and the synth-orientated duet with Canadian singer-songwriter K.D. Lang in Lightning Fields, I believe offer the best quality material by far that Implode the Mirage has to offer. These songs are structured in such a way where they don't actually feel like the band are going through the motions. If the rest of the album was written with the same kind of quality as those particular tracks, the album would easily be a couple of places higher on the list. So, as such, my highlights from the album are My Own Soul's Warning, Lightning Fields, and Caution. So, I would probably suggest this album to someone who's a little bit more familiar with the band. It's not one I would particularly want them to discover in their Killer's journey for the first time. But yeah, for a more seasoned fan, yes, one to check out. Released in 2018, we have the band's 5th album, Wonderful Wonderful. The album was released 6 years after their previous effort, so expectations were very high from me, despite the fact that Kooning was largely absent from the recording. The lead single from the album, The Man, was fresh, energetic, and incredibly catchy. Funky and a very simple synth hook, which was a real earworm. I thought the band was so back, but my hope, unfortunately, was misplaced somewhat. But not entirely. That particular caveat is crucial when it comes to me discussing this album. There are some really good songs on here. The brooding and slow-burning title track that gets things going, the aforementioned The Man, the minimalist Rut, which discusses Brandon Flowers' wife's struggle with PTSD, and the U2 inspired anthem Life to Come, and the pulsating synth-led Tyson vs. Douglas that should be marked down as one of their most distinctive songs in their discography. Mostly thanks to the use of audio from the fight that the song is named after. In order to establish balance, I do need to discuss the weaknesses from Wonderful Wonderful. There are plenty of them, and the songs that I mentioned before take up what is essentially the first half of the album. The back end, however, leaves a lot to be desired and it lets the album down severely. For reasons I can't really understand, it just runs out of momentum by the time we finish Tyson versus Douglas. So much so that it feels like it's running aground. I mean, like Costa Concordia style. The ballad Some Kind of Love is just so formulaic and boring, which is not a word you would really be able to really apply to the Killers. The two closing tracks, For Calling and Have All the Songs Been Written, are also completely uninteresting, despite the closer featuring one of my absolute favourite guitarists in Mark Knopfler. His poetic guitar licks just can't save the song. It is a song that I would rate as one of my least favourites from them. It just feels like that these songs were just included to make up the numbers. The album is only 10 tracks long, and the fact going on half of them just feels so average and dull, that is the biggest disappointment to me. They could have quite easily have done an EP with those opening 5 or 6 tracks, and it would have been an exceptional set of songs. And my highlights from the album are Wonderful Wonderful, The Man, Life to Come, and Tyson versus Douglas. So yeah, it is definitely one that has plenty of highlights, but also plenty of lowlights as well. So yeah, nonetheless, I would still recommend listening to it. Released in 2008, I have placed Day and Age in 5th place, and this was the band's 3rd album. This album would mark yet another departure in their sound, adding much more presence in the bass lines whilst combining their previously used new wave and heartland rock sounds. This results in a rock, dance, and funk mix, which would be the overall sound, but with even more curveballs thrown in. And Flowers did himself say it was like a continuation of their previous 2 albums, and I would say I definitely understand where he's coming from with this. That being said, the album is much more focused on the keyboards and the bass, so as a result, the guitars are used a lot more sparingly. However, when they are applied, they are used to sublime effect. The opening track, Losing Touch, is absolutely brilliant, seamlessly blending all of these elements, but with brass dotted throughout as well, and Koenig's chords sound massive, and the closing solo is just so majestic. The lead single, Human, follows, which is more akin to a sort of Pet Shop Boys style synth track. This particular song would dominate the airwaves in 2008. The production again is just so good, and the synths and Ronnie's drums sound absolutely huge. Despite this, I can't really go out of my way to listen to it anymore, given how often it was played when it came out. And of course, we were all stumped by the question, are we human or are we dancer? That would confuse millions. The other single, Spaceman, which didn't do as well as Human, is a delightful track, full of interesting musical choices, and every member of the band having their chance to shine on it. This song wouldn't be the only one with distinctive musical choices. The likes of I Can't Stay has a sort of tropical calypso vibe about it. I just want to go to the beach and drink a tequila sunrise when I hear it. There's even space for a couple of ballads in amongst the carnival of sound on offer here, with the dreamy A Dustland Fairy Tale and the very poignant closing track, Goodnight Travel Well, which was written about Flower's mum, I think, who would pass away during the recording of the album. The album is wildly experimental, but delightfully fun and entertaining for the most part. But it is still distinctively The Killers. It is so much more than Human if you felt a bit put off by that particular song. My particular highlights from the album are Losing Touch, Spaceman, Joyride, and This Is Your Life. Yeah, it's got a brilliant set of songs on it. It's a lot of fun, and if you are looking for something a little bit different to what you've heard from the band before, definitely give it a whirl. Appropriately, in 4th place, I've put the band's 4th album, Battleborn, released in 2012. This album comes after a 4-year break following the release of the colourful and eclectic Day and Age, and we are introduced to a sound more reminiscent of Sam's Town, but with a lot more in the way of synths. So in a way, it's a bit of a melting pot of everything the band had cooked up in the 8 years from their debut. I was somewhat unnerved in the first few bars of the opening track, Flesh and Bone, as it starts with an 8-bit sounding opening. And I was so disconcerted that before the main rhythm section kicked in, I thought they may have put the wrong CD in the case when I got it on release day. And it has this massive grand sound from the first chorus onwards, which was very, very satisfying. As the album progresses, there's a lot of the songs which offer a more sentimental side to the band, exploring stories of youth and coming of age based in the band's adopted home in Nevada. The album title Battleborn is named after the phrase featured on the Nevada flag. The likes of Runaways, The Way It Was, Miss Atomic Bomb, From Here On Out, and the title track are reminiscent of rock artists who explore more true to life narrative song structure, like, say, Bruce Springsteen, John Mellencamp, and Tom Petty, but set to huge sounding compositions with the synths and the combination of delicate and massive sounding guitars. Whereas you've got the likes of Here With Me, Deadlines and Commitments, and Be Still, which offer a more sort of melancholy and moody side to the band sound, with a bit of a step back from the big sounding melodies, offering a more slower pace and sparser arrangements, but still retaining memorable choruses. It's an album that gets overlooked a lot when you compare it to some of their other albums that get all the discussions. This album, Battleborn, is big, it's powerful, and quite frankly, it's brilliant. And the fact it's in fourth place just shows how strong the top end of their discography really is. And the highlights for me on the album are Runaways, The Way It Was, Deadlines and Commitments, and From Here On Out. If you are more a fan of the Sam's Town era of the band, then yeah, definitely check this one out for sure. Released 20 years ago, which quite frankly is ridiculous and quite extraordinary to me, I have put the band's second album, Sam's Town, in bronze, and this would be the band's second album. I mentioned in the introduction that the band began their career as a new wave revival act of sorts. This album is not that, not even close. The synth-heavy sounds from 2004 are now replaced by arena-orientated rock-styled arrangements. With this, all the instruments are now supporting different roles. On the whole, the synths provide ambience and textures instead of being the focal point. The guitars are now front and centre for the most part. The likes of When You Were Young, For Reasons Unknown, Uncle Johnny, and This River Is Wild have the big guitars to prepare you for a more aggressive side that we hadn't really heard from this band before this release. And you've got tracks such as Bling, Confessions of a King, Read My Mind, My List, and Why Do I Keep Counting, meanwhile having a stronger focus on the more melodic side of the arena rock with more keyboards and more sparse guitar arrangements. To begin the album, we have the title track, and it's as opulent a composition that the band have created to date. The rich strings, drop D-flat guitars to create some grit, and the story of Brandon Flowers' journey from small-town Utah to Las Vegas. The album itself is a concept album of sorts, with his experiences and characters found along the way. The album title is named after the casino of the same name in Las Vegas. One thing you'll also notice is that Brandon Flowers' voice sounds very different. In the debut album, a slight delay was actually applied to his voice, which resulted in a very distinctive sound. However, on Sam's Town, they didn't actually use any kind of auto-tune or any tools to tweak his voice in any way. So what you hear is exactly how he sounded in the studio, which when you listen back is quite remarkable, and it really shows off how good a singer he is. The first single from the album, When You Were Young, has this arena rock formula down to a T, with the restless guitars and string arrangements alongside the memorable guitar hook. A soft bridge before a massive crescendo always hits the spot for me. The other singles from the album were For Reasons Unknown, Read My Mind, and Bones, and they are all very strong songs for different reasons. For Reasons Unknown is a darker, slightly menacing song in which Flowers plays the bass. Read My Mind, however, is a gorgeous track with a stronger focus on strings and synths, as well as this is that this song doesn't really have a specific chorus, so it feels a bit more prose, and that song in particular happens to be certainly one of my absolute favourite Killers songs. Bones is probably the poppiest song on the album, but begins with a massive Come With Me choir, which could either sound hopeful or ominous depending on your point of view. And out of those singles, that song is probably my least favourite. All of these tracks, apart from the opening title track, are sandwiched between a 38-second piano interlude, called Interlude, and a more fully formed band version of the same song, called Exitlude. The penultimate track, Why Do I Keep Counting, before it hits Exitlude is a beautiful ballad that had peaks and troughs for days, going from gentle keyboards to soaring guitars and a pounding ending. Exitlude, however, feels like the kind of music you would hear at the end credits of an old film or musical. As such, it has this very theatrical kind of presence about it. It is a sort of a narrative, if you like, coming of age story of a very young, innocent Brandon Flowers. My highlights from the album are For Reasons Unknown, Read My Mind, This River is Wild, and Why Do I Keep Counting? It is an absolutely brilliant album. If you want to go down memory lane, 20 years ago, remember, then absolutely give this one a whirl again. You won't regret it. In second place, we have the band's debut, Hot Fuss, released in 2004. It is one of the best debut albums of all time, in my opinion, and the soundtrack to the lives of so many people. When it came out, I was 13 years old, and I remember buying it from Woolworths with my pocket money. If I were to read out the names of the singles from Hot Fuss, it will transport you back to a time when you first heard these songs, and you would probably be able to identify when you heard them as well. Mr. Brightside, Smile Like You Mean It, All These Things That I've Done, Somebody Told Me. In terms of the strength of the singles, there aren't all that many albums since 2000 that have had released such iconic songs, and those with as much staying power as these. Most people's introduction to the band and what they are associated mostly with to this day is Mr. Brightside. It is a surprisingly tricky arpeggio on the guitar with a mostly monotone vocal by Flowers. The song, of course, is a classic, and as I mentioned, it is one of the most streamed songs on Spotify. However, in my opinion, the album is so much more than this song, and there are many better ones on it. It is disappointing that the album gets overshadowed by this one particular track. I certainly don't hate it, but it has absolutely been a victim of overplaying. You've got certain album tracks such as the opener, Jenny Was a Friend of Mine, and On Top, and All These Things That I've Done with its kind of gospel arrangement, showcase the band at their absolute best, in my opinion, with the opener being a dark yet catchy track with plenty of layers of synthesizers, guitars, and a very prominent bass line throughout. On Top shows a more accessible side to the band with a simple synth opening combining with equally simple yet massive sounding guitar hooks in the chorus. And another track that I need to talk about is Believe Me Natalie, which has a sort of moodier side with a more ominous sounding Tom Phil intro on the drums before the levies break with the walls of guitar and synth. The only real disappointment I have with this album is the last track, Everything Will Be Alright. It's a nearly 6 minute long sort of electronic ballad, but it just sounds so dull and dreary. And when you compare it to the remaining the 10 songs that came before it, it ends on such a whimper to me, and that is pretty much the reason why it's rated at number 2. Despite that, how they incorporate distinctly 80s electronic music, arena-worthy guitars, and Flowers' unconventional lyrics and vocal style create a perfect marriage and one of the most original pop albums of the 2000s. And my favourites from the album are Jenny Was a Friend of Mine, Smile Like You Mean It, All These Things That I've Done, and On Top. As I said, it is one of the best debut albums of all time, and if you want to go back to memory lane, yeah, give it a whirl. In gold, somewhat controversially, I have put my number 1 album by The Killers as 2021's Pressure Machine. It is their 7th album and remains their most recent release as of 2026. This album is The Killers at their most raw and emotional. Sam's Town followed Flowers' anecdotes from Las Vegas, whilst this album works a bit like a prequel. It intertwines past stories, small town life, and current crises facing everyday Americans. Most of the tracks begin with a related short spoken word passage. Each one is spoken by someone living in Meppy in Utah, which was where Flowers was raised. There is an imposing menace throughout the album, and the stripped-back production, as well as the uncompromising lyrics. The opening track, The West Hills, is a pining, dark, brooding song, which Flowers references the ongoing opioid crisis, which he references as hillbilly heroin in the song, The narrator himself in the song is incarcerated for possession of the drug. The next song, Quiet Town, has a sort of like a multifaceted storyline. It opens with a high school couple who went to the local school who got hit by a train. Flowers mentions in the lyrics before the chorus is that things like this aren't supposed to happen in this quiet town. The opioid crisis is mentioned again in the second verse, in which the crisis, which was once kept quiet, is now national news. And the song wraps up with the narrator being actually lucky that they grew up in a quiet town due to the tight knit community spirit. Easily the saddest song on the album comes next, in Terrible Thing. The song follows a young man who is on the verge of killing himself, as he cannot fathom a way to escape the small town he has spent his life. The song is as raw as it gets. It's just vocals and acoustic guitar. And the line especially, "the cards which I was dealt get you thrown out of the game," is a line in which, of course, in classic Flowers style, is open to interpretation. But as someone on the autism spectrum who has been sort of maligned in the past, I can very much relate to that particular lyric. The whole album actually is dotted with exceptional songwriting, written with so much emotion. And Runaway Horses, for example, tells of young lovers with big dreams but decide to stay in their small town comfort blanket. And another particular highlight for me, In Another Life, tells the person again who ended up staying in their small town, working for the main employer, but also relationships that blossom in these particular communities. The particular lyric, "Am I a man of your desire, or just a guy from your hometown?" Is very much typical of small towns and villages. As someone who currently works in a very small village but has also lived in one, it can certainly be the case where people just sort of meet up and end up sort of staying again in their sort of their small town bubble, if you like. And then you've got sort of more raw storytelling with the likes of In the Car Outside and Desperate Things, the latter song being about a small town policeman who captures a domestic abuser and goes on about how he cannot stand guys that hit women, and he's spoken to the female victim as well in the song. It is very raw stuff. Overall, it's very gentle and very quiet, but without warning, there's just this enormous cacophony of sound in the bridge. Then we get to the title track as we start to round things up on the album. Pressure Machine, the song, is just an emotional roller coaster. So, Pressure Machine is a bit of a metaphor, if you like, for what small towns can do to you. And they will grind you down. Well, they can do. They can grind you down due to the lack of opportunities and, yeah, just this feeling of not being able to spread your wings and escape. And then the lyrical references here are just on a whole other level in terms of what the Killers and what Flowers can do. Life will grow you a big red rose and rip it from beneath your nose. Sweating it out on the pressure machine spits you out a name tag memory. It just gives me goosebumps every time. And the latter one, of course, the latter reference, the name tag memory, is a burial stone. That's how I certainly interpret it. I mean, this far into their career, for the band to evolve as far as they have, is remarkable in itself. Especially when the album that they put out 17 years after their debut is as solid, as emotional, and as just fascinating as this one. My highlights from it are, well, I mean, there's so many, but I would say Quiet Town, Runaway Horses, In Another Life, and Pressure Machine. This one did pass. I think it didn't seem to get an awful lot of traction as far as sort of sales go and what have you. But absolutely check this out. It is a phenomenal album. The closest I can sort of compare it to would be Sam's Town, albeit in a much more stripped back production style. And there we go, folks. That concludes the Killers album ranking video. Thank you all so much for sticking around, and I will see you again in the next one. Ta-da!